Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Christina Tallens, and I'm the Director of Modern Slavery Risk Assessments at the Wilberforce Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you to our first webinar of 2024. And in today's presentation, we're going to be looking at how we conduct checks on working hours, what are the traceability systems that need to be in place, and how the way in which we manage workers' hours on specific sites can impact their lives. So with that in mind, over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be looking at how we conduct checks when we are conducting risk assessments and, to help you identify any potential issues and think about remediation. So I'd just like to point out that my presentation is being recorded, but we will stop the recording when we come to questions at the end. During my presentation, you're all welcome to send in your questions by using the chat box at the bottom of your screens. I think that there should be about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for us to go through any questions or have a group discussion. And given that we might have a few more people joining us later, we might not be able to go through all the questions, but if you need to, I can come back to you via email or privately. So without further ado, for those of you that don't know us, we are the Wilberforce Institute. We're a world-leading research centre. We were founded in 2006, and we are part of the University of Hull. We have an interdisciplinary focus with staff from history, law, social sciences, and education. And we're also a team of practitioners that work alongside the academic team. We have had direct experience of dealing with forced labour, debt bondage, trafficking and smuggling in supply chains. And our risk assessment services were set up back in 2014 to help organisations and help businesses in particular address modern slavery risks. My background is that I am the Director of Risk Assessment Services here at the Wilberforce Institute. I did work with Anti-Slavery International, and I worked with the same organisation in France, Spain and Italy. I am a trained social auditor, and I specialise in agriculture, and I have had a lot of experience around social auditing, and I've worked with companies such as SGS, Intertech and Impact Limited. My background is that I was a consultant on labour and human rights issues, and specifically on the UN Global Programme against trafficking and smuggling of human beings, which is coming a lot more to the fore now. And I was ethical trade manager for a big commodities company, and so sat within the smallholder working groups at the Ethical Trading Initiative. So I've had the opportunity to work alongside retailers and international brands. So this should say why check for working hours. So excuse that, we've left the old title in. So under the Modern Slavery Act, you might need to conduct checks on suppliers and address any issues found when it comes to working hours. Really, you've got to be conducting checks to identify any poor labour practices. So sometimes a desk review helps you to get some information. A risk assessment on a site gives you much more salient and relevant information about how the workers are being managed. You can help suppliers fine-tune their systems and then help them protect themselves from modern slavery or labour exploitation risks. And really, if you're a business, you should be actively managing your own risks in your own supply chain and within your organizations, and help you. And this could help you improve conditions for workers. The objectives for today really are to help you understand what is meant by working hours and not excessive. Help you understand how to check working hours using a social audit approach. So give you a little bit of background into how we do that. Help you understand solutions and follow-up with suppliers, but it might also be within your own organizations. And then cover off any questions that you might have at the end and look at best practice. So what is meant by working hours are not excessive? So according to the Ethical Trading Initiative, which has a specific clause on this, workers shouldn't be working more than 48 hours a week as a legal standard working week. So that would mean 8 hours in a day, 48 hours in a week. Management has to be really familiar with the laws on overtime hours which apply to their production areas, and in general workers should not be asked to work more than 12 hours overtime per week. Now there is an ETI exception clause that was introduced a few years back to allow production sites, especially in agriculture and food production, to go over the 60 hours a week, but there are certain conditions for that to happen. The first of those conditions would be for those working hours to be agreed through a collective bargaining agreement, and secondly, it would be for those overtime hours to be still falling within the legal hourly working week in the country. So in the UK, you could really technically be working up to about 74 hours a week, so that would be legal, but yeah, it would have to be approved through collective bargaining agreements. The other thing is that workers should have at least 1 day off per week or 2 days off in a 14-day period. So this gives businesses a bit more flexibility during peak periods. And any hours that are conducted outside the normal working week, if we take 48 hours, but if it's not 48 hours and workers are contracted to 39 hours, let's say, it would be any hours over those contracted hours would be considered overtime. And although in the UK it's not a legal requirement for overtime to be paid at a premium, the ETI would ask that any overtime hours are paid at a premium rate. So workers should also be receiving their annual sick and maternity leave to which they're entitled in line with the hours that they've worked. And the way that the legislation works again in the UK is that all back pay and the number of hours are calculated on the average 12-week period prior to any holidays being taken. So we said we'd look at a little bit at the social audit approach. So I say this every time we talk about social audits, triangulate your data. So the way that we do this when we conduct a check is first, we might be speaking to workers on a site. So we have the information from people directly. Then we would have a site walk around so we can have an inspection of what's going on and how things are managed on the site. And thirdly, we would do a document check. So this is where the evidence often lies. And if you're a good auditor, you might be able to get away without interviewing workers, which sometimes, reduces that potential risk for them. But the document checks would really be about, when it comes to working hours, you'd be looking at clocking in and clocking out systems. So you'd be trying to see that, the exact working hours have been recorded when workers arrive on site and when they leave the site. You'd want accurate recording of hours. I have seen some registers when I come to a site, which look like the old school registers where you have a little cross to say that you're present on that day. We don't want to see any of that when it comes to working hours. We want to see start times and finish times, because it's the only way that we have to guarantee that people are being paid for any overtime if they're working any over the 8-hour days. We'd also want to see the number of hours recorded in wage slips, and especially if overtime hours are going to be paid, we'd want to see how those overtime hours have been calculated and make sure that they're being properly paid, workers are being properly paid for that. And then there's another little point here about 0-hour contracts. So 0-hour contracts are legal in the UK. They're not legal in other parts of the in other countries across the EU. But this is really about how many average hours people are working in a day and in a week. And the reason why we look at those when it comes to agency workers, for example, is to make sure that people are able to earn the living wage. Some sites have specific requirements for their agency workers to be on site, to be ultimately just disposable for them. But if they're not, if they're only getting 20 hours a week, especially with the cost of living prices at the moment, they might not actually be able to make ends meet. So I would just say keep on top of that and look at how many hours are being given to agency workers. Key questions on working hours. We always do a little checkbox templates to try to make things easy for you. So these would be some of the top questions that I would ask. So do you keep hourly records for workers? And it's a yes or a no answer. Do the hourly records show that hours are not more than 48 hours a week or 60 hours including overtime? And we have the Working Time Directive in the UK, so that would fit in with that. If you have piece rate workers, sometimes people are paid according to a volume of work that they've been able to achieve within a certain period. We would look at how many pieces that person can complete in a number of hours. So we'd see whether the calculation has been done properly. Sometimes people will be asked to pick, I don't know, let's say 30 punnets of mushrooms and, you know, a 30-minute in a 30-minute window. Is that realistic? Those are the kind of things that we would be looking at to make sure that people are able to achieve the minimum wage within that time frame. Does the site have a copy of a signed contract with each worker? And here we would want to see the number of hours that are recorded in the contract as a standard work week. The records show that overtime is not excessive, and here we would look at peak periods especially, and we would conduct a check of all of the hours that have been recorded across the site for everybody on there, and class the hours from the lowest worked to the highest worked to be able to see whether, you know, what is the most hours somebody has worked on the site, what's the least, what's the average. And then we would look at a 14-day period going forward to make sure that day breaks have been given. So if the overtime is there and it's over 48 hours, are there opt-out agreements? So this is a legal requirement again in the UK. And then the records clearly show the number of regular and overtime hours worked. So those are documents. In terms of remediation ideas, if you come across a recording of hours that a site has taken down, the most important thing, the biggest problem that we normally come across is that the exact number of hours are not accurately recorded. So we would want to see start and finish times recorded by the workers, not by a supervisor. So sometimes, especially on sites where there are a lot of people, the management would rather that the supervisor take note of the start and finish times, but this means it's not in the hands of the worker, and you can't properly check this. The second thing that I would say is calculate how long it takes for workers to complete piece work, so that they're getting correct pay per hour. Thirdly, check how agency workers hours are managed. So this is where I was talking about the living wage issue, but it's also if an agency worker is working on your site, they might also be working on another site, and they might also be working on another site. So there was an interesting Guardian article just at the start of the year talking about zero-hour workers in the UK, saying that people were working 3 jobs on average in some cases to make ends meet. So this means that people are going to be tired, and you need to be aware of this. This really impacts on the quality of their life. Check how their hours are managed, how the agency managing their hours, whether they're sending them far away, what kind of travel times they have attached to that. Because although it doesn't count as a working hour, as working time, sometimes during peak periods, if people are working already 12-hour shifts and they've got a couple of hours on top of that in terms of travel time, then you've got people on their feet for 14, 15, 16 hours, and that it might become a health and safety issue. So I would check on that as well. Make sure that everybody's got 2 days off in a week, and adequate daily breaks are given. So these are 20 minutes in the UK for within a 6-hour period. Ensure that overtime is voluntary. So this is, somebody saying, look, if you don't work overtime, I won't be able to give you any more shifts. We would consider to be slightly threatening for workers and would fall under a forced labor issue. So you need to make sure that everybody is saying that they are volunteering to work overtime. We've already talked about agency workers. A good practice would say also provide notice periods if you can 1 week in advance. I know it's not always possible, especially in agricultural work, but try to give as much notice to workers about when they're going to start and finish work. And secondly, I would say don't invite more workers than you need to come to you on a given day. That's another problem that we pick up. So with agency workers and in certain areas, it's not necessarily easy to get people coming in that are reliable on a daily basis. So sometimes management orders in more workers than they need from the agency, and they end up sending some of those workers home. What I would say is if somebody's made the effort to come to the site on a day, they should really be given a minimum of 4-hour shift. And if you don't have any more work for them during that day, then you could potentially send them home. But we would say either give them the 4-hour shift or indemnify them for 4 hours for having turned up to work. Then you need to ensure that contracts have start and finish times. Ideally, they should have start and finish times for the shifts. And you know, you can't leave it a completely open. You can't leave it as completely open-ended shift times, because you will definitely have a fallout with people if that is the case. And it just means that people know what kind of employment contract they're going into and what the work situation is going to be. So you need that to be very, very clear. And then ensure that all overtime hours are recorded and paid at a premium. When it comes to worker interviews, if you do need to do worker interviews, keep it very, very simple. I always say try not to be over onerous in your questioning, and try to be very open-ended and not lead workers into giving you information that you're leading them to give you a specific answer. So just keep it very simple. What days are you working? From what hour to what hour? Where do you sign in and out? Do you have to work overtime? Can you say no if you want to go home, if you've got kids to pick up? Do you get overtime payments after how many hours? What's your take home pay in a week? This would be important for piece rate workers as well. Do you think that's enough to live on? And do you have any mistakes in your pay slips? Have you ever had any mistakes? And if you do, can you report them to people? Will somebody rectify them? Those are just some really simple, basic questions, which would give you actually quite a lot of information. And also it means that you're not leading people to give you specific answers. That's really it on working hours. What I would say, I've been saying it for the last few weeks for people, because we have had some requests about further training. We do have modern slavery training that is available on this website here, where you can find out more about it there. If you would like more specific training, I know there are going to be short courses that are launched this year. And the email for Andrew Smith is at the bottom there. You could always send him an email. Yes, but please feel free to contact us if you think that would be useful to you.